In November 1989, a letter arrived at the 17th Precinct in East New York, titled, "This is the Zodiac." At first, it was dismissed as a letter from a madman and quickly forgotten. However, the letter was sent by Geriferto Seda, who began to commit random shootings and send more letters in the name of the Zodiac. This led many New Yorkers to believe that the original California Zodiac killer had returned. Despite long breaks in his criminal activity, the New York Zodiac continued to interact with the media. In the second half of 1993, he wounded 3 more people, one of whom died. The investigation reached a dead end, and by the end of 1994, the case was closed. It was only several years later, thanks to a chance meeting unrelated to the murders, that the New York Zodiac was finally arrested. Wait, so he just took the name of the famous killer to be feared? How can you possibly appropriate someone else's glory like that? It's just complete savagery. On November 17, 1989, a letter arrived at the 17th Precinct in East New York. It was addressed to the Elite Street Crimes Unit. Included with the letter was a chart with sections representing the signs of the Zodiac. The Virgo section was missing, and Taurus had been crossed out and replaced with the words, "The first sign is dead." On another page was text that began with a recognizable, if slightly altered, phrase, "This is the Zodiac. The first sign is dead. The Zodiac will destroy the 12 signs of the belt. When will the zodiacal light appear? The Zodiac will sow fear. I've seen plenty of cops on Jamaica Avenue and Eldon Lane, but you're no good and you won't get the Zodiac. Orion is the one who can stop the Zodiac and the 7 sisters." Despite doubts about the authenticity, detectives began checking old cases. Those familiar with the San Francisco murders of the 1960s noticed the connection, but did not advertise it. Similar letters were sent to the police every day, so the letter was quickly forgotten. However, in early 1990, the police turned their attention to a random shooting in New York, although murders were not uncommon there. Wow, he directly quotes and copies the style. Why? To seem cooler? It is not enough to just write, "I am a killer." Do you also need to add mysticism? This is some kind of theatricality, not a crime. On March 9, 1990, 49-year-old Mario Orozco was walking home from work. He was walking through a dangerous area of East New York. Due to poor eyesight, he did not notice a young man following him. As Orozco passed the cemetery, the assailant jumped out and shot him in the back without warning. Orozco never realized what had happened. The assailant took his time, wrapped a note around the gun, left it on the sidewalk, and walked away. Despite being seriously wounded, the bullet lodged in his spine. Orozco survived, but was unable to provide police with any useful information. The only thing he remembered was the crimson beret the assailant was wearing. The weapon, a 9mm homemade pistol, was untraceable. Detectives believed it was simply a random attack. Just 20 days later, on March 29th, a similar incident occurred. Around 3 a.m., 34-year-old Jermaine Montenestro, slightly drunk, was walking through the streets of the same East New York. He too didn't notice he was being followed. The assailant fired a shot and then, while Montenestro lay wounded, searched his pockets. The criminal left the money, but took the victim's passport and then ran away. Although the bullet pierced his liver, Montenestro also survived. Police again decided that this was an isolated incident. The victim said he was drunk and didn't know where to go. And apparently this was a very strange robbery because the criminal left the money. Both March attacks seemed like ordinary senseless violence, and detectives saw almost nothing in common. He seems to like working at the same time, as if he has a strict schedule. And why would he take the passport but leave the money? Is this some kind of sophisticated form of bullying? It just defies all logic. It took 2 months before the police got a new lead. On May 31st, 1990, 78-year-old Joseph Prowse, despite all the persuasion of his friends, went for a night walk. He often looked for food in the garbage, and this time too. Around 1:30 a.m. When he was walking home, a young man approached him and asked for water. Prowse refused, which angered the stranger. The young man caught up with Prowse and, after exchanging a few words, shot him in the lower back with a semi-automatic pistol. When the victim fell, the criminal left a note next to the body and disappeared. Prowse was hospitalized. Queens detectives Mike Saravallo and Bill Clark took over the investigation. The victim was a World War II veteran. Due to health problems, he walked with a cane and suffered from poor short-term memory. This greatly complicated the police work. Prowse's testimony constantly changed. At first, he described his attacker as African American, then as white or Hispanic. He didn't even always recognize the detectives who were questioning him. The police also had another witness, a young woman, but she refused to cooperate. She saw the criminal escape, but she didn't want to be seen at the crime scene because she was spending the evening with a married man and was afraid that their affair would be exposed. The detectives were baffled by a strange occult note that the criminal left next to Prowse. So why did he just shoot the old man for refusing him a glass of water? That's just incredibly stupid. And why does he leave such stupid notes every time? It's some kind of mix of psychopathy and stupid theater. I just can't believe it. Detective Saravallo was certain they were dealing with a serial killer, possibly the real Zodiac from San Francisco. His fears grew when more letters arrived at the New York Post and 60 Minutes. They were written in the same strange style as the notes found at crime scenes. In the letters, the Zodiac detailed the time, date, and location of each shooting, as well as the zodiac signs of his victims. The killer claimed that all the attacks took place in Brooklyn, but the police knew that Prowse had been shot in Queens. Apparently, the Zodiac himself did not know this. A Post reporter, suspecting that the letter was genuine, brought it to Brooklyn detectives. How could someone be so eager to boast about their accomplishments that they would send letters to newspapers, and yet make such stupid mistakes as confusing the boroughs? This is just incredible self-confidence and incompetence at the same time. It was only by pure chance that Detective Clark was at the 17th precinct that he learned of the investigation from a note found on Orozco. He immediately noticed the similarity to the note left next to Prowse and saw a clear connection to astrology. The detective began to double-check all the shootings that could be connected to the latest murders, but it yielded no results. He then decided to check the birthdays of those who had survived the attacks, and that's how he found Orozco and Montenestro. The dates, times, and locations of the crimes matched perfectly. Orozco was a Scorpio, Montenestro a Gemini, and Prowse a Taurus. The homemade gun used in the attack on Orozco was never found, but the detectives had notes on the zodiac signs. Was this all just part of some astrological plan? Shooting people based on their zodiac sign. What's in that person's head to think that? How could they come up with such an absurd idea? However, the detectives did not know that they were patrolling the wrong area. At this time, the Zodiac was already tracking a new victim in Manhattan, on the other side of the East River. Early in the morning, 30-year-old Larry Parham was sleeping on a bench in Central Park. He hid his wallet in his sneaker. Due to financial problems, Parham became homeless, but he was determined to get out of this situation. He took care of himself, was neat, had already saved about $4,000 and was planning to start a new life. Parham believed that the park was safer than the shelters. But that night, he was watched by a young man. When Parham fell asleep, the stalker approached him, examined the wallet, left $49 untouched, put the wallet back, stood up and shot the sleeping man. I can't understand why he left the money. Is he not a robber? And why did he attack a man who was just sleeping? It's completely illogical. It's as if he's just looking for victims according to some unknown logic. Those familiar with the Bay Area murders did not believe that both cases were linked to the same person. The first doubts were raised by the handwriting, which was very different from the original Zodiac. In addition, the victimology was also different. The new Zodiac attacked single people at night, while the California Zodiac most often attacked couples, and sometimes during the day. All the evidence pointed to this new killer being a copycat. The only thing they had in common was random attacks on strangers and communication with the police. I don't understand why you would copy someone if you still do it your own way. It's like trying to copy a famous painting, but changing everything except the title. What's the point? A little over 2 years had passed since his last attack when the Zodiac decided to resurface. On August 10, 1992, he committed his most brutal crime to date. Around 1 a.m., 39-year-old Patricia Fonte met a stranger near the Highland Park Reservoir. After flirting with the attractive young man, she agreed to go for a walk with him to the reservoir. At 1:30 a.m., the young man pulled out a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol and shot her. When she stood up and tried to fight off the attacker, he panicked and stabbed her more than 100 times. The victim died at the scene before the ambulance and police arrived. Police responded to a call on June 18, 1996, and found 17-year-old Gladys Chachi Reyes wounded. She claimed that her brother, Geriferto Seda, was still inside the house and had shot her and her boyfriend with a homemade pistol. The ambulance that arrived first on the scene was parked outside and was let in by a neighbor. For people were trapped inside the house while the shooter fired at the officers from a window. Detective Joey Herbert of the 17th Precinct arrived on the scene and was able to talk to the man inside. Hours later, he convinced 27-year-old Geriferto Seda, known as Eddie, to surrender to police. When the arresting officers entered the apartment and saw Seda's homemade pistols, they joked that it would be too much of a coincidence if the guy turned out to be the Zodiac killer. On June 21, 1996, police were able to gather enough evidence to formally indict Geriferto Seda. The handwriting in his statement matched the handwriting in the Zodiac letters. Seda's fingerprints were found at the crime scene, and his DNA was found on a postage stamp on one of the letters sent to police. He was charged with 3 counts of murder and 5 counts of attempted murder at his trial in Queens. During the trial, Seda, who was represented by court-appointed attorneys, repeatedly disrupted the proceedings by shouting obscenities at Judge Robert Hannafy. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorneys Masters and Shear, presented more than 150 pieces of evidence and called 45 witnesses. After a 6-week trial, Geriferto Seda was found guilty on June 24, 1998, and sentenced to 232 years in prison. Life after the verdict. In prison, Seda began reading the Bible and quoting it to his cellmates. His sister refused to communicate with him, despite his attempts to reconcile. In 2003, while in Attica prison, he began a romantic relationship with transgender woman Cynthia China Blast, a member of the Latin Kings gang. They even tried to get a marriage license. Seda's victims still suffer physical and psychological problems. Larry Parham, a deeply religious man, said he forgives Seda. Others, like Orozco and Montenestro, have been able to move on without letting their experiences hinder them. As for the San Francisco Zodiac, whom Seda so emulated, he was never caught and his identity remains a mystery. DNA on a stamp. That's just genius. On the one hand, he thought up complex schemes and even behaved defiantly in court. And on the other, he left such a simple and obvious clue. How can a person who tries to be so smart make such a stupid mistake? It's just unbelievable.